What brings you to the clinic today, Mr. But Winter realized she didn't know the man. That was rare because Winter knew almost everyone in town. He was young, mid-30s, but he looked as if something had aged him recently. There was a great weight upon this youth, and Dr. Winters wondered what he had brought with him to the couch today. The cup of tea sat in his lap, untouched, and he seemed more than a little dubious of it. I found your clinic on a message board and thought you might be the one to help me. Dr. Winters picked up her own cup of tea, stirring it and watching the smoke dance. And what is it you need help with, Mr. Call me Charlie. I want to tell you a story, and at the end I'm hoping you know the best way to help me. It all starts with my grandmother and a strange family secret that she's kept from me for years. Winter smiled. Sounds like a soap opera. Charlie didn't return the grin. In a lot of ways, it is. My grandma was probably the best friend I ever had. Ever since I was a little kid, she was always there for me. She lives right down the road in this big old house that scared a lot of the other kids in the neighborhood. The reputation wasn't without reason, because it looked like the Haunted Mansion from Disney World. It's surrounded by a big old wrought iron fence, topped with sharp spikes that bend at crazy angles in some places. The yard is inhabited by grass that, while green, is a deep, unsettling-looking green, and the trees always look dead, no matter what you do to them. The house itself is gray and black, a monstrosity that rises out of the yard for 3 stories and has an attic and a basement. The roof is made of black shingles that are the color of coal and always look ready to fall off. Several of the rooms are topped with pointy tower roofs, and that just seems to draw the aesthetic together perfectly. The icing on the cake is the big round door that serves as the entrance to the house, a big oak sentinel that's banded in iron and just looks like someone stole it from a castle. Despite how it looks, I have nothing but happy memories of my grandmother's house. I never knew my grandpa. There's a picture of a middle-aged man in a black suit with an oiled goatee and an impish grin hanging in the living room that I assume is him. But all I really know about him is that he built the house for Grandma, and the two were happy together. Some of that happiness seems to come at the expense of my mother, who has very few good memories of her father. He didn't work. He was inherently wealthy and basically beggared himself to build the house. Mom said he could often be seen in the library or his study, just reading or listening to the radio. Sometimes when she went to talk to him, he would pretend he didn't hear her, but sometimes he would just look at her like he didn't know who she was and he was confused to see her. She kind of thought he might be on drugs, though she never saw him use any, and he just seemed to live in a fog all the time. Of her mother, my grandmother, she had a much better opinion. Your grandmother made up for his coldness in spades. We were always going to do something or shop for something or going on trips while he stayed at home for business. I don't know what business he had, but he never left the house, and that was fine with me. I wish now that I had spent more time asking Mom about her childhood. She died when I was in the 10th grade, after a moving van ran a red light. After that, it was just me and Grandma in that big old house. I still live there with her, actually, but it's less out of convenience these days. Grandma's begun to forget things that are a little necessary. She can still feed herself, still use the bathroom on her own, and dress herself, but she forgets parts of the past. She always seemed to remember who I was, but often she would forget who the people in the photos were as she toddled along. She asked me who the dapper gentleman in the living room was one morning, and when I told her that was Grandpa, she looked a little lost. She said she didn't remember being married, and when I told her how he had built the house for her, she seemed surprised. "Well, He must have loved me a lot if he built this big whole house for me, I guess. I thought she might be a little bit confused. She is 70, but the day she asked me who the little girl in the beach photo was, I knew something was going on. Grandma would have no more forgotten my mother than she would have forgotten me. I made an appointment with her doctor, and after some wheedling, I finally got her to agree to go. They ran all kinds of tests, looking for the usual signs of memory loss, but they were as stumped as I was. The doctors say she doesn't show any of the physical symptoms of dementia or Alzheimer's, but that's what it seems like. Dr. Bailey looked at the x-rays and shook his head after I finally convinced her to go. It's crazy. Physically, her brain is completely healthy. There are none of the usual signs of damage that lead to a diagnosis, but all the symptoms are there. I'm almost afraid to prescribe anything for her. Let me send these to my colleague and get back to you. In this case, I think I would like a second opinion. So we took her home, and we hoped for the best. If people thought the outside of Grandma's house was spooky, then they would have crapped themselves when they came inside. The inside of Grandma's house would have put the Addams family to shame. The interior was done in dark woods, the ceilings vaulted, and the furnishings only adding to the Gothic style. There was a foyer, a living room, a dining room, a library, a study for Grandpa that was now a sewing room, a full bathroom off the kitchen and a half bath off the foyer, and a spacious kitchen with a wood-burning stove. There were stuffed creatures in some of the rooms, and none of them seemed the usual choice for trophy animals. Ravens and crows and cats and foxes, and ever since I was a kid, I always suspected that there was something off about them. They seemed to watch you sometimes, especially if you were doing something you weren't supposed to do. Anyway, the bedrooms are upstairs, and the stairs now have one of those little power chair climbers installed, so Grandma can get up and down them. And my room was the second largest of the 4 bedrooms, with Grandma being in the master bedroom. I didn't have to work, and Grandma required a lot of care these days, but I still tried to maintain my college classes so I could get my bachelor's on time. Most days I just went about exploring the huge house, perusing the books in the library, or looking at things in Grandpa's old study, just kind of learning about the family history and pursuits. I learned that Grandpa may have actually been doing business while Mom and Grandma were on trips. He had inherited more than a few businesses from his father, businesses he seems to have run into the ground to spoil her. The last one had gone bankrupt in '95, right around the time he had a stroke, and Grandma had lived comfortably off his savings ever since. I learned a lot of family history in my downtime, but it wasn't until I started looking into Grandma's history that I stumbled across a book that would change everything. It was a small leather book, seemed little more than a personal journal. I'd been reading about my great-great-grandmother, someone who lived during the Civil War and had been somewhat of a hermit, as I figured it was just another journal on woodland recipes or an herbal for making helpful salves. When I opened it, however, I jumped as something crackled over my fingers. It was a static discharge, nothing too frightening, but the crash from downstairs made me jump again. I left the book sitting on the floor and went down to find Grandma, lying on the floor of the kitchen, clutching her head. She'd been making soup, the knife, fortunately, still sitting on the cutting board, and she was writhing in pain as I came in. I asked what was happening, but she just kept stuttering broken words that didn't make a lot of sense. I went to the phone thinking she was having a stroke when she yelled at me to stop. She was sitting up slowly, clutching her head as she told me not to call an ambulance. I remember something I'd forgotten. I helped her up, and we walked to the living room so I could settle her in her favorite chair. I went to turn the heat down on the stove, got Grandma a cup of tea, before asking her what was happening. I was chopping vegetables when I suddenly got the worst headache of my life. I Saw a box in the attic, a box of books that I once kept in the library. They were part of... She paused, shaking her head a little. Something I used for work. I don't remember having work the day of my life, but I remember putting them there because they were important. I think... She paused, staring at the dark wood of the coffee table. I think they might have also been dangerous, somehow. I didn't know what she could be talking about, but after settling her in the chair, I went to look in the attic for the box. I didn't have much else to do that day, and my curiosity was piqued. The attic isn't a place I go often because it's so cluttered. It's full of old boxes and antique furniture, knickknacks from trips my mother and Grandma went on, and all of it strewn helter-skelter across the place. Fortunately, I thought I knew the box she was talking about, so it wouldn't be that hard to find. Grandma had asked me to bring it up here last year when she was trying to make some room in Grandpa's study, and I'd put it in the corner near the window. As I looked for it, I reflected on what Grandma had said. My mother had never talked about Grandma having a job, and I didn't know what she had done before she met Grandpa. She must have done something, I reflected, since she and Grandpa hadn't met till she was in her 30s. She seemed to know a lot about herbs and taxidermy, and given the rural nature of the town we lived in, it wasn't that hard to imagine that she was in the general community's interest of hunting and fishing or other woodly pursuits. I winced as my foot found the boxes I was looking for, and I was glad to see that the one I was looking for specifically was on top. Inside were a couple of books on herbcraft, some leather-bound tomes with weird runes inside, and one of those little journals like the one I'd seen in the study. I opened it up and was confronted with the same electric shock and another loud scream from downstairs. I took the book downstairs as I went to see what had happened, and Grandma had righted herself by the time I got to the living room. She was blinking owlishly at me, not seeming sure what to make of me, but when she saw the book, she stiffened like a dog that's heard a sudden noise. "You found it. Did you open it?" "Yeah, but it's empty. Just a weird symbol in the middle," I said, as I sat across from her. She held her hands out, wanting to see it. The symbol, I probably need to talk about the symbols, since they're so important. It was drawn heavily in what would be quantified as the middle of the book. It was a large, unbroken circle with little spikes every few inches. The inside had a mess of overlapping symbols, runes, I guess, and the whole thing looked like something out of a horror movie. It was kind of creepy to look at, and I handed it to her gladly. After staring at the weird symbols for a few minutes, she shook her head. "I don't know what it is, but it looks so familiar. I think I've seen it in the basement somewhere. Feels like it's linked to that place somehow." I scratched my head, not sure what she was talking about. "I don't think there's anything in the basement other than more boxes, Gran, but we can go have a look if you want." I didn't think we'd find anything down there, but something seemed different about her, and I wanted to see if it would help. Her speech was definitely more like the grandma I'd grown up with. Her speech had been listless in the last few years, her posture and stance making her look tired all the time, and as we went down into the cellar, there was none of her usual infirmity. She was downright spry as I took the stairs behind her, and I was happy to see her in such good spirits. If the attic had been trashed, then the basement was a total disarray. There were little avenues made out of old boxes and dusty furniture. I saw quite a few of my mom's old things down here. My grandmother, it appeared, hadn't had the heart to get rid of them, and now her old easels and art supplies lived right next to her covered paintings and ceramic cats. It was a little odd to see my mother's legacy just shoved down here all pell-mell, but Grandma didn't seem to have time for sentimentality. Grandma traversed the underground boulevards like a bloodhound, looking for something in particular. She was swerving this way and that, taking pathways with a purpose. And when she found the end of the causeway made of old baby things and garbage bags marked charity, she stopped. I looked around dubiously. Well, what are we looking for? I don't see any books, but I guess there could be some under these things. A sudden light made me turn, and I watched as Grandma traced a bright image along the stones here. The tip of her finger glowed a little as she ran it over the dusty walls, something starting to form there. It was like a kid with chalk at first. The doorway was 4 lines without dimension, but as she traced that symbol, the door began to take on weight, and we were soon standing in front of a handsome oak door that led to God only knew where. Turns out it was to a staircase, which we followed into the ground. What lay below it was even more spectacular. Grandma seemed as surprised as I was, but it could only have been her that set something like this up. It was a round, dirty room, the ceiling made of foundation stones, and the whole place looked like the lair of a witch from a German fairy tale. A cauldron was sitting dry over a cold fire. There were shelves of strange-looking books and scrolls. There were herbs and other things hanging from the ceiling. In the center was a table, a squat little thing that looked older than sin, and on it sat a book and a note. As Grandma went exploring, I felt drawn to the note and went to look at it. Turned out it was from Grandma. To Grandma. "Hello, Mildred. If you're reading this, then it looks like you're started getting rid of painful memories again. I'm guessing as you tried to get rid of Deborah's memory, you messed yourself up. It's never been clear how many threads are connected to her, and you could end up a drooling fogey in a nursing home if you keep going on this route. That's why, as any good witch does, we set up the books. The rule of 3 states that we have to spread them across 3 different ones, and the one on the table is the last key. Open it and you'll remember everything. Be warned, however, that you will remember everything. You'll remember what you did to your husband. You'll remember what you did to Debbie. And you might not be able to live with yourself again. If that seems like too much to do right now, then go back upstairs and leave the last one until you're ready. Otherwise, I suppose I'll see you soon. Mildred." What had she done to Debbie? Debbie was my mother's name. What had she done to my mother? She and Mom had always gotten along well. At least they had until right before she died. Mom had learned something she didn't quite dare tell me, but she'd spent the last few months before her death distancing herself from my grandma. She tried to put distance between Grandma and me too, but I was old enough to push back by that point. Didn't really matter anyway, because a week after she started getting insistent, she had died. I took the note to Grandma and held it out accusingly. "What does this mean?" She took it, read over the message, but shook her head. "I don't rightly know. I don't even remember a girl named Debbie, but sounds like I'll find out if I open that book." The two of us looked back, the book suddenly looking less than inviting. I wanted to stop her as she got up, but I didn't think I could have summoned the strength. Grandma knew what she wanted, and when Grandma wanted something, it was impossible for her to turn away from it. Grandma was a nice lady, but she was stubborn, and she got what she wanted in the end. She doubled over as she opened the book, and the spark from it lit up the room as she lay panting on the floor. When she got up, wiping dirt from herself, she looked at me and hissed softly. Oh, "Oh God, Charlie, please tell me you didn't." But I already had the note out, my questions plain on my face. She sighed heavily, taking a seat on one of the stools by the table. "Guess I've got some explaining to do." "So, sounds like your gran had some skeletons in her closet," Winter said. Charlie nodded. "She was a witch. A real witch, not like the fakers on TV or the weirdos in the woods. Grandma was an honest-to-God witch, and she used her powers for some less than savory things." "Like killing your mother?" Winter hedged. "She hadn't killed my mom. Not really, but she had cursed her. Mom had threatened to move, taking me with her since I was underage, and Grandma couldn't have that. She told me I meant the world to her, almost more than her daughter, and she had been in such a rage that she cursed my mother before she could stop herself. Mom had been driving home from the house when she had gotten into the wreck, something I hadn't known, and Grandma had never forgiven herself." Charlie set the tea down, undrunk, and looked at Winter. It appeared he had come to the heart of the matter. "She didn't kill her husband either, but she might as well have. Grandpa was an industrialist, and he'd been planning to open a factory in the area, something that would have destroyed the economy after it inevitably closed and ran out all the business besides. Grandma, a young witch living in the area, couldn't have that. She was already using her craft to take what she wanted from the townspeople, and his involvement would have ruined that." Charlie put on a fake old lady voice, and Winter wondered if it was a good facsimile of his grandma or not. "What I was doing was a little bit of light taking. Hawk would have killed the town in a decade, and that didn't seem right." He breathed out a sigh of amusement as he sat back. Awfully altruistic of her, huh? So she kept him under her thumb, bleeding him dry and keeping him from practicing his own kind of magic, the capitalistic kind. When Mom was born, my grandfather was under her spell, and he didn't even understand that he had a daughter. Grandma kept her away from him as much as she could, for fear of her presence weakening the magic. When he died of a stroke after his business holdings tanked, it was almost a blessing, she told me. A blessing? Can you believe that? Winter sat back, giving the kid a hard look before asking the question on her mind. "What is it you want, Charlie?" "It sounds as if you can make people forget, but I need a rather selective form of forgetfulness. I want to forget that my grandma did these things to my mom, to her husband, but I don't want to forget her. She needs me, and I need her, and in a lot of ways being separated from her has hurt me deeply. Grandma's my only real family, the only one I have left, and the thought of abandoning her is something that makes me extremely sad. That being said, I know that we can't go back to the way we were, not with the knowledge I've got. So I need you to take those parts out and leave the rest. Can you do that?" Winter smiled sharkishly at him. "I believe I can do that. Lean forward, close your eyes, and take a deep breath." An hour later, Charlie walked out of her office, a changed man. Dr. Winter hoped his memories would stay repressed, and she hoped that his grandmother wouldn't notice her handiwork. If she did have any skill with altering memories, she might sense the involvement of an interloper. The last thing Dr. Winter wanted was to have to kill some old witch on her doorstep. But it wasn't like it would be the first time. You're still here. Thanks so much for joining us for tonight's spooky tale. If you'd like a little bit more spooky in your life, why not click on one of the videos that appears at the end of our story? Or maybe head on over to one of our playlists where you can get your fill of spooky content. If you like your spooky a little more tactile, I've got a new book that's come out. If you'd like your own copy, there's a link below in the description where you can get your own copy of my spooky book. If you like what you see here on the channel and think you might like to support in a more monetized way, then why not come over to Patreon or become a member on YouTube? Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our members now. Thanks to Civ Garstad, Unicorn Hollow, and Heather for being our Spooky Ghost contributors. Thanks to Janet, Lee Kendall, Saikat, Ronda J, Sue Casper, and Valinator for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributors. And thanks to Hi Stacy, Winter, Xaronan, Stephanie Carrington, Tyler Parker, Cinnamon Fox, and Sarah Samar 42 for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. If you too would like to support the show, we always tell you to come on down to Patreon or check out my member section on YouTube. Spooky Skeleton contributors get their video 12 hours earlier at 8:30 a.m. as opposed to 8:30 p.m. And Ghostly Readers get a book every time I write one on their doorstep. There's actually one coming up here in a few weeks, so if you'd like to get in on that, please go ahead and sign up. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.